You have to tell the whole truth, what had happened, what was happening, and what's going on.
Objective, and his commitment is to bring transparency and truth back to government, to share the truth even when it's hard to hear.
The American people have the right to expect those who are serving in high office to meet high ethics and transparency, obviously, standards.
They didn't mean any of it. They took us for a ride and dumped us off to the side without the truth. We heard the president promise again and again, and his team, as you just saw, told us so many times, promising more transparency than America has ever seen with the Biden administration. Well, that is certainly not what we got. That is certainly not what we're getting. The man in charge of our nation's military defense was out of commission for several days, and even left the president of the United States unaware, in the dark, without the facts. The man had surgery and some kind of post-op pain, reportedly, that sent him back to the hospital. It's hard to even imagine worse timing with all that's going on in the world. Whether it directly involves us or indirectly involves us, there's Ukraine, the Israel-Hamas war, our troops getting shot at in the Middle East and having to fight back now against Iran-backed and trained enemies. So much going on. Your military defense secretary needs to be, well, gathered, talked to. They didn't know where he was. I'm Harris Faulkner. You are in the Faulkner Focus. The Pentagon says Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin checked into Walter Reed for an elective surgery at the end of last year, so, last month. Then went back due to those complications I mentioned. The procedure was performed on December 22nd. He returned home the very next day. But on January 1st, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin was admitted to the ICU because of severe pain. His number 2 at the Pentagon was on vacation. President Biden was not told until January 4th, some 3+ days later. And oddly enough, in the White House, they may not be feeling it or seeing it. But outside 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, there's outrage.
The National Security Council didn't know it. The White House didn't know it. Congress didn't know it.
It's inexplicable, but that's not the way the Pentagon ought to be conducting business.
I think it was a dereliction of duty. The Secretary and the administration, frankly, need to step forward and give the American people the facts.
A stark reminder of what we are up against. I'll lean into some of the things I mentioned now. Iran-backed enemies attacking our troops in the region 121 times since October 17th. Houthi terrorists going after commercial ships in the Red Sea. Remember, those are the Yemeni terrorists trained and paid by Iran. Hezbollah, the north of Israel border, Lebanon is where they launch from. And they've launched 40 rockets into Israel, and that happened just this past Saturday alone. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in the Middle East trying to tamp down the threat of a wider war that could draw in multiple nations. The New York Times is reporting Iran's beefed up nuclear program shows they have so much uranium they could make 3 nuclear weapons in a matter of weeks, staring down the threat of wider war with a top official inoperative. Where was Lloyd Austin? Well, now we know. Should we have known as it was happening? Of course we should have. In focus now, Republican Congresswoman Kat Cammack. First, though, Peter Doocy live outside the White House. Peter, I understand that John Kirby was just speaking on Air Force One, traveling with the president today. What have we learned from John Kirby?
So, Harris, it builds on what I was told first thing this morning when I asked White House officials, does President Biden still have confidence in Secretary Austin? And I was told, yes, absolutely, the president has full trust and confidence in Secretary Austin. He's looking forward to him being back at the Pentagon. Kirby, in the air, elaborated on that.
I want to make sure I put a fork in my answer to you. There is no plans for anything other than for Secretary Austin to stay in the job and continuing the leadership that he's been demonstrating.
But Republicans want Austin out. Elise Stefanik's new call for a resignation includes this line: "At this dangerous time, when American service members are under attack in Iraq and Syria, our closest partner and ally, Israel, is at war with Hamas terrorists, and the threat from communist China is on the rise. It is critical that the Secretary of Defense has the full trust of the American people, Congress, and the White House." Austin himself says he's okay, and that, I also understand the media concerns about transparency, and I recognize I could have done a better job ensuring the public was appropriately informed. I commit to doing better, but this is important to say, this was my medical procedure, and I take full responsibility for my decisions about disclosure. Secretary Blinken in the Middle East didn't want to go any further than that.
What is your policy?
Again, I think he put out a statement addressing this. I'll let that statement speak for itself.
What would your policy be about yourself?
Well, I won't get into hypotheticals.
The Deputy Defense Secretary Kathleen Hicks was on vacation in Puerto Rico January 2nd when she found out Austin's powers were being transferred to her. But she didn't know for 2 more days, till January 4th, that Austin was in the ICU.
Is this acceptable to you? Vice President Pence called it a dereliction of duty.
I don't think it's a dereliction of duty. No, I don't think that at all. I do wish that it had been disclosed, and maybe it was. Maybe just not made public. So I don't know all the particulars here.
We are often told here at the Biden White House that when the president is on vacation, he's not really on vacation because he is always working. President Biden was in St. Croix when Austin went back into the hospital for that pain, for this trip that he's still in the hospital for. And somehow President Biden's work calls from vacation, from the time that he got back to the West Wing, did not reveal that his top military advisor was in a hospital bed. Harris.
I mean, that is just gapingly. I mean, my mouth was just open as you said that. That is gapingly irresponsible. I mean, that is a hole in information at a time when the world, literally parts of it where we're engaged diplomatically in so many ways, is on fire. But this I thought interesting, and I just want to bring this up. In your reporting, the Pentagon #2 was on vacation. And I'm learning that Ms. Kathleen Hicks was in Puerto Rico. Now you've just told us that President Biden was on St. Croix. Was anybody picking up their messages? And what if it hadn't been good news? God forbid. Thank the good Lord he's okay, Lloyd Austin. But would anybody have known?
So 2 things about that. That really undermines the whole idea that President Biden is on these constant work calls while he is on vacation with the family. The other thing, and Kirby was kind of touching the edges of this, but apparently Austin was on a secure call at some point on January 1st, which is the day that he went into the hospital for that post-surgical pain. And Kirby was explaining that the White House Situation Room here underneath the West Wing, which organizes those secure calls, does have to check in with cabinet-level secretaries like Austin to know where they are to patch them through. But it's a very general thing. So they just knew that he was in the Washington, D.C. area. They didn't know that he was in a hospital in the Washington, D.C. area.
That's really interesting. All right. Peter Doocy, excellent as always. Thank you. Fox and Friends Weekend host Will Cain summed it up this way.
It's kind of important to trust the Pentagon. You know, multiple front wars across the world. The Secretary of Defense is 6th in command, in the chain of command. It's unacceptable for the American public and beyond the ability to even conceive that the President of the United States would not know that the Secretary of Defense is out of commission for a week.
In focus now, Republican Congresswoman Kat Cammack of Florida, member of the subcommittee on the weaponization of the federal government. How about the snoozization? That's not even a word. But with somebody asleep with a switch, what in the world? You're defense secretary.
It's crazy, Harris. I mean, leave it to the Biden administration to take something routine like an elective surgery, which happens often with members of Congress, with members of the administration, and botch it. I mean, this is dangerous incompetence. It's not just incompetence. It's not just a lack of transparency. It is dangerous. because not only, which has been pointed out multiple times, are our men and women in uniform and our military installations abroad under constant attack, particularly in the Middle East, but there is a heightened level of engagement around the globe. And when you have the Secretary of Defense, sixth in command, out of commission, his deputy not even knowing that he himself is out of commission in the ICU and on vacation. I mean, this is absurd. This just is another example as to why actions have consequences. And I go back to the 117th Congress, Harris, when there was a vote under Speaker Pelosi to grant a waiver to allow Austin to become Secretary of Defense. Now, the rationale back then was, well, you know, it's been done before, so we should do it again. I was proud that I voted against granting Austin that waiver. He should have never been Secretary of Defense because he was a failed commander when he was in control of Central Command. In fact, when I was at the Naval War College, he was a case study in failures of leadership. We've known back then, and he has demonstrated, whether it was then with the botched Afghanistan withdrawal or now his lack of communication, he is not fit to be the Secretary of Defense.
Look, when we learned about that secure call that's brought about by the Situation Room and all they knew was that he was in the D.C. area, there are so many questions now about, was he trying to hide something? And look, there are HIPAA laws, there are all sorts of things, but there's transparency that the people need to know in this country. And we didn't vote for him, as you just pointed out. That's not a person that we voted for. So if they're in charge of something that directly affects our well-being and national security at home and that of our soldiers and all branches of the military around the world, I think we need to know about it as a public. All right, and I'll move on to this. 2 days before the first House hearing on impeaching, speaking of our security, Homeland Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, he is at the border in Eagle Pass, Texas, meeting with officials and Border Patrol agents talking about the illegal immigrant crisis that he has called simply a challenge. House Speaker Mike Johnson was just in Eagle Pass, as we know.
The White House, the administration, Secretary Mayorkas have put a welcome mat out. I believe Secretary Mayorkas is an abject failure, but it's not because of incompetence. I believe he has done this intentionally. I think these are intentional policy decisions that he's made, and I think there must be accountability for that.
Congresswoman.
Harris, as we would say here in the South, he's a real peach. You know, he has lied repeatedly to Congress. He has been negligent in his duties. He needs to go. He needs to be impeached. Our national security depends on it.
Do you think it'll happen?
Absolutely. I have yet to meet one Republican. Heck, I even know of some Democrats that are anxious to get rid of him. And let me remind you, when behind closed doors, we told him, you're getting ready to be impeached. He said, you're not going to like who comes next. I asked him if that was a threat.
Whoa.
He just smiled. This man is dangerous. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he is two-faced. We need to get rid of him now.
What did he mean, who comes next?
Well, that was the big question. I asked him, I said, is that a threat? And he just smiled. And I thought, this man knows exactly what he's doing. This is 100% by design. They want an open border crisis, whether it is for a election, whether it's for future votes as they work to get rid of citizenship as a requirement for voting. We're not sure, but he was very, very clear in what he said, and there were other members in the room. So I will never forget that. And as we go to impeach him for his negligence, for him destroying our national security and eroding our national sovereignty, that will be top of mind.
Yeah, I wish somebody had gotten that on tape so we could play it over and over. Perhaps we will, when you guys go into session with him to ask questions, bring that back up. That sounded like a threat. And as you said, it's got politics behind it. Okay, thank you so very much for being with me, getting us started today. Some big, heavy, important topics today, and we'll move forward. Congresswoman, thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.